This episode of Harvey Brownstone Interviews is brought to you by the Harvey Brownstone Talk Show Blend Coffee, available at hollywoodblends.com. Everyone's saying it's the best coffee they've ever tasted. Why not give it a try and see for yourself?
Hello, everyone. I'm Harvey Brownstone, and today's guest is a highly acclaimed and beloved actor, writer, producer, and director who's been entertaining audiences on stage, in movies, and on television in a stellar career spanning 5 decades. Of course, we all remember him as Hank Zaret on WIOU, Lex Luthor in Lois and Clark, The New Adventures of Superman, Harold Waldorf in Gossip Girl, Thomas Eckart on Agent X, and Adam Kane on Mutant X, for which he was nominated for a Gemini Award for Best Actor. But well beyond those roles, our guest has demonstrated remarkable versatility and has delivered a whole slew of memorable performances in every medium. On Broadway, he appeared in Romeo and Juliet, End of the World, and Yentl, for which he received a Theatre World Award, and he received a Drama Desk Award for his performance in American Days and an Obie Award for his performance in The Dining Room. In London's West End, he starred in The Normal Heart and Long Day's Journey into Night, and at Carnegie Hall, he appeared in The Soldier's Tale. On the big screen, he's appeared in many movies, including Hussy, Missing, Windy City, for which he was named Best Actor at the Montreal International Film Festival, Honeymoon, Once We Were Dreamers, Honey, I Blew Up the Kid, The Insurgents, An Invisible Sign, The Trouble with the Truth, and Southie, and Grey Lady, both of which he co-starred in, co-wrote, and directed. And on television, in addition to the shows I already mentioned, you've seen him in Alfred Hitchcock Presents, The Hitchhiker, for which he received a Cable Ace Award nomination, Sex and the City, Law and Order, The Good Wife, Madam Secretary, Blue Bloods, and many more. And he's co-starred in numerous great TV movies and miniseries, including Family Reunion, Kennedy, Hitler's SS, Portrait in Evil, A Case of Deadly Force, The Impossible Spy, Notorious, Lady Killer, and of course, the multi-award-winning miniseries Baby M, for which he won a well-deserved Emmy Award for Outstanding Supporting Actor. And if all of that weren't enough, our guest is also a founding member of the Nantucket Film Festival, and he's the artistic director emeritus of the Nantucket Theatre Workshop. I am delighted and honored to welcome the incomparable John Shea to our show. John, thank you so much for being here.
Harvey, thank you so much for your absolutely generous introduction.
Now, I must say that you've had a very impressive education. You earned a bachelor's degree in theater from Bates College, followed by a master's in fine arts degree from the Yale School of Drama. And was Meryl Streep one of your classmates?
She was a schoolmate. She was the class behind me at Yale, yes.
Have you had the chance to work with Meryl Streep?
I have, yeah. In fact, at school, we started a cabaret company together, and we used to do cabaret shows there. And then Lynn Meadow, who was the founder of the Manhattan Theater Club in New York, invited us all down to make our debuts in New York at the Manhattan Theater Club in the cabaret show there. And then after that, she went her way, I went mine. We stayed friends, but I invited her back to Nantucket, where I live, to be at the theater workshop, and she came a couple of years ago and we did a big benefit together and performed old cabaret shows with our mutual friend Joe Grafazzi.
Oh, would I have loved to be in the audience for that. Now, I understand that after seeing your performance on Broadway in Yentl, Lee Strasberg invited you to study acting with him. What would you say was the most important thing you learned from him?
Well, let me say that he invited me to join the Actors Studio, but having just spent 4 years as an undergraduate and 3 years in New Haven, I didn't want to be part of an official program and have more people tell me what to do. So I accepted this idea of being an observer. So for the next few years, I observed at the Actors Studio in both New York and in LA, and watching Harvey Keitel and Al Pacino and De Niro and actors like Estelle Parsons, and all the great people that were there at the time. Directors like Sidney Lumet and Arthur Penn. It was like beyond graduate school. It was like getting my PhD and watching all these people and what they did and how Lee would get them opened up for a scene, guide them so generously. So he was another mentor of mine. After a few years, I got too busy to go back there regularly, but he left a permanent impression with me.
I mentioned that you starred in Yentl on Broadway. You played Avigdor, who was portrayed in the movie by Mandy Patinkin. Now, I know the screenplay was very different from the Broadway show, but would you like to have played Avigdor opposite Barbra Streisand in the movie?
Well, so we did the original production off Broadway at the Chelsea Theater at the Brooklyn Academy of Music. A woman who is the co-founder of the Actors Studio, named Cheryl Crawford, came to see the final performance. And she said, I want to move this to Broadway. We did it on Broadway for a year. I did play Victor, the male lead, Tova Felch, who played Yentl. And the greatest, honestly, honor, and I have to say, insight for me was at Yale, I was a director. I got my master's in the directing program, but I turned myself into an actor for this Yentl performance by turning this Irish Catholic kid who grew up in Springfield, Massachusetts, into a Hasidic Jew who lived in Bechev, Poland, in Isaac Bashevis Singer's great short story, which was turned into the play. In doing so, I had to grow a beard. I had to learn how to tie tefillin. Joe Papp taught me how to tie tefillin. I had to go to Williamsburg undercover and hang out in the back of the yeshivas dressed as a yeshiva boy. And so what I discovered about acting is that it's really detective work. And that if you're serious about something, you have to go deep and you have to find out what the truth of the given situation was. And so then I did the play and I loved every moment of it. And then I heard that Barbara wanted to make the film. So I went to meet, not Barbara, I'd met her later in life and I liked her a lot, by the way, but I went to meet a woman who was helping her produce it, Sis Corman, and casting it. And I went to meet Sis and she said, I'm sorry, and we have Barbara's regrets too. We can't cast you in the play because we want to do it authentically. And I said, what do you mean? They said, well, you're Catholic. You grew up Irish. You're not Jewish. I said, no, but I just did it for a year on Broadway and nobody complained. They said, no, we want it to be absolutely authentic. And so Mandy, who was a friend of mine, got the role. And by the way, he did a great job.
Would you have liked to do it though?
Of course, I had done it and I thought it would be great to work with Barbara. What they did that we didn't do is they turned it into a musical. And so it showcased her. There was only one song in the Broadway production of it. It was a big wedding song at the end of Act One. But no, Barbara obviously made it her own and she put her stamp on it and, was able to showcase her excellent voice and her great instincts. And Mandy, who was a great singer, right?
Yeah, he was great. I read that only three actors did a screen test for the role of Indiana Jones: Tom Selleck, Harrison Ford, and you. What was that experience like?
Well, one day I was doing a play at the Public Theater for Joe Papp, a play called The Sorrows of Stephen, a romantic comedy. And there's a knock on my dressing room door. The door opens and this young guy's there. And he said, hi, can I talk to you? I'm Steven Spielberg. And I said, hi, Steven, happy to meet you. He said, I just saw the play. Would you do me a favor? Would you come out to LA this coming weekend? And would you audition for a screen test for this film that I'm going to do? And I said, well, I got to talk to Joe Papp about that. I'm starring in this play. And he said, well, I think Joe will let you out. I've spoken to him. And so anyway, Joe did let me out for that weekend. Steven sent me a car and a driver and a first class ticket to LA. I flew with a young actress who was in the first class with me. And we worked on these scenes. I didn't know what it was going to be about. If she did, she didn't tell me. We land in LA. The next day we go down to the Egg Factory, which is owned by George, who had just directed Star Wars. And there's George Lucas and Steven Spielberg. And I walked into the dressing room and Steven said, I want you to meet the other guys who are going to be competing with you for this part of Indiana Jones. And by the way, they've got the Indiana hat for me. They've got my hat size. They've got identical costumes for all three of us. And one of the guys is Tom Selleck and the other guy is Harrison Ford. So the three of us spent the weekend battling it out with this actress who turned out to be Karen Allen, who had already been, I think, cast in the role and she starred in the first Indiana Jones with us. And I love the whole experience. But look, those guys, Harrison Ford had already done Star Wars with George. They knew him well. You may know this, Harvey, but that Tom Selleck actually got the role, got the original offer, and then he couldn't do it because ABC picked up this pilot that he was in, which was Magnum PI, and the role went to Harrison. And in the end, God love them. And they were all great. Those guys are older than I am. They're bigger and taller. And I think that they were more Indiana Jones-ish. And so Jones-ish. And so I ended up going back to New York and doing a lot of other things.
Are there any other roles that you auditioned for that you really wanted that you didn't get?
Yes. but it turned out to be a great thing. I went to see Marty Scorsese one day. I wanted to be in Goodfellas. I had read the script, and he said, well, what do you want to play? And I said, the role, like the Irish guy. He said, no, he's not Irish, and you're not going to do it. Get out of here. And I said, what do you mean? He said, no, that you're great. You're not Italian. I want all Italian guys in this thing. So he said, you know something? The Irish are supposed to be such great filmmakers. Why don't you go out of here and tell your own stories? There hasn't been a good Irish American filmmaker since John Ford. So go find your own stories and good luck with that, right? So Ray Liotta ended up playing the role, and Ray Liotta was great, but Ray Liotta is very Italian. But I thought about what Scorsese said to me, and I thought, maybe he's right. And so a couple of years later, I met a guy named Daniel Egan, the right Irish last name, and he told me that 4 Academy Award winning directors had wanted to help him tell a story, but they had all, for one reason, either they were too old, too sick, or, too in Hollywood to be able to do it. The rights came to me, and I spent the next, I don't know, 8, 9 years working on the screenplay, and that's the film I want to make next. So that role that I didn't get because of Scorsese has turned into this film directing career, which now I embrace and love. Southie, my first film, starred Donnie Wahlberg and Rose McGowan and Amanda Peet and Will Arnett and Ann Mira and Lawrence Tierney, all these great people. But it was shot in Southie, the heart of the Irish mob. And so that was the first one where I began to explore this idea that Scorsese had planted in me. And then the second one, Grey Lady, is a thriller, romantic thriller that I shot on Nantucket, starring Eric Dane and Amy Madigan and Adrian Lester and Natalie Z and all these great people. That, again, is an Irish-American hero at the core of it. And so this third one that I want to make is called The Junkie Priest. That one is about the Daniel Egan story, who is, set in New York. So anyway, because I didn't get the audition, I got another whole career.
It's so ironic because the Italian Martin Scorsese made a movie called The Irishman, didn't he?
That's right. And I like to think that I helped nudge him in that direction, because at that point he hadn't done that. And he saw Southie. He took it home with him because my editor was his assistant editor. And he brought it home with him and he screened the film. And then I heard he loved it. And so he then a couple of years later made that Irish film with Daniel Day-Lewis and all those great actors, right?
You played the grandson of the legendary Bette Davis in the 1981 TV movie Family Reunion. Can you share any memories of working with Miss Davis?
I love Bette Davis. I was very nervous about meeting her. She again came to see a play that I was doing, American Days, that one I did again at the Manhattan Theater Club. And so the next day or a few days later, they sent me a car in New York City. They took me up to Long Island, this big mansion. I was told that Miss Davis wants to meet you. And so I was quite nervous. I was going to be playing her grandson in this. And so they take me to the main house in this compound. They open the door, and I have to walk across this wall-to-wall carpeting, which is not wall-to-wall. It's an oriental carpet. It's the biggest carpet I've ever seen, Harvey, in my life. It's like a par 3 green. And I go, and there's Bette Davis sitting at the end of the on a divan. And she says to me, what's your last name? I said, Shea. You're Irish, right? I said, yes. She said, when were you born? I said, in April. She said, so was I. Where are you from? I said, Massachusetts. She said, so am I. She said, where did you go to college? I said, to Bates College. She said, so did my first husband. She said, have you been on Broadway? I said, yes, I have. She said, so have I. She said, tell me something. Do you smoke? And I didn't smoke, but I had done some research about Bette Davis before I had this meeting. And I thought to myself, And I looked down there at the coffee table, and there was a pack of unfiltered Pall Mall cigarettes. So I said, sometimes I smoke. And then she said, right, light me a cigarette. And so I took the pack of cigarettes, I banged it on the back of my hand. I pulled out 2 cigarettes, I put them in my mouth, and I lit both at the same time, never losing eye contact with her. And I handed her a cigarette like Paul Henreid had done in this movie with her. It was like their substitute for a sex scene. And back in the 40s, and I handed her the cigarette, and she said, oh, you're good. We're going to get along famously. So
You reproduced what Paul Henreid did in Now Voyager.
Now Voyager.
That
Right,
is that is a classic story, I'm telling you. And you portrayed Bobby Kennedy in the highly acclaimed miniseries Kennedy How did you prepare for that role?
Well, that was another one where, having turned myself into these various characters over the year, I knew that turning myself into Bobby Kennedy was going to be a huge challenge, but also a privilege because I had known, obviously, what the Kennedy brothers had done. I had grown up rooting for John Kennedy. I was very sorry with both of their demises. So it was, I had shot my first film, you mentioned Hussey, that I did with Helen Mirren. My first feature was in England that had established me as a star in England. And so I had agents in London. They sent me a screenplay called Kennedy. They wanted me to play Bobby Kennedy, and they wanted me to help find a John Kennedy. And so they had originally offered it to Warren Beatty. Warren was unavailable, didn't want to do it. I said, what about Martin Sheen? Martin Sheen did it with me. So the two of us then went to the Kennedy Library, and we were given audio tapes of the boys, the brothers, giving speeches, and access by Dave Powers, who was John Kennedy's great friend and assistant, to all the archives. We spent 6 months doing research to prepare for the shooting of the film, which we then shot in New York. We shot it in Washington. We shot it in Palm Beach, in Virginia, at Hickory Hill, at Bobby's house. So anyway, it was an amazing experience because the film is not salacious. It doesn't deal with the love lives. It starts with the day of the election and it finishes at the end of the assassination. It's simply called Kennedy.
How in the world did you master that distinctive Boston accent?
Well, and this is where it's funny, Harvey, the story, because we shoot the first scenes down in Palm Beach at what they call the Winter White House, right? Joe Kennedy's old house on the beach. And so we shoot there. And it's a big dining table scene. Geraldine Fitzgerald's playing Rose. And anyway, Martin Sheen is about to make a toast and say, so it's like action, and Martin, action, please. And Martin says, would you all please pass me the bottle of wine? And director says, cut. Hello? And Martin says, what? He said, well, it might be a little bit, the director's English, the great James Goddard. He says, that might be a little over the top here, Martin. Do you want to play it back? Listen. And Martin hears, like this oratorical demand, please pass me the bottle of wine. And so Martin and I look at each other and we realize that what Dave Powers had given us to learn the accents had been all the speeches that the brothers had done around the world. And that it was, speaking to 10,000 people rather than around a dining table. The speech that I had is this, Harvey, I'll see if I can do a little. I haven't done it for many years, but Bobby Kennedy gave a speech in South Africa, and he said, these are revolutionary times that we all live in. And thus, as I have said in Latin America, and in Asia, and in my own country, the United States, is up to the young people to take the lead. And so thus, you and your young compatriots everywhere have had thrust upon you the greatest burden of responsibility that any generation has ever known. So they were oratorical, and they were passionate, and then we learned to moderate everything for the film and make it conversational.
Yeah, it was just a great movie. John, you're well known for the meticulous way that you prepare for a role. For example, in the 1985 French thriller Honeymoon, you played a sociopath. Is it true that as part of your preparation, you engaged in psychoanalysis in character?
It's true, Harvey. I did. I did. I didn't understand what the role exactly was. I know I was offered it. I was going to be starring opposite a great French film star named Nathalie Baye, B-A-Y-E, a César, a winning star, one of the great actresses in the history of French cinema. And I didn't want to let the American side down. So I entered myself into psychoanalysis in that character at the John Jay College of Criminal Justice with the head of the criminal justice, the abnormal psychology department. And he told me that only one other actor had done this with him. It was Montgomery Clift, who wanted to understand who Sigmund Freud was when Clift was about to play Freud. So I paid this great professor to read the script and then meet with me over a period of weeks so he could psychoanalyze that character and me in the character. And I learned that I wasn't playing a psychopath. I was playing a sociopath, much like some of the politicians we know today, who are super smooth on the outside, well-dressed, debonair, handsome, sexy, but inside, they're motivated by an appetite which is insatiable for either power, for blood, for money, or whatever that might be. So that was that character.
Amazing. Well, I mentioned your meticulous preparation. In Once We Were Dreamers, you played a concert violinist. Did you actually learn how to play the violin for that role?
You've done your research, Harvey. No wonder you're one of the great interviewers in Hollywood. I have to say, thank you so much. I've forgotten about the fact that, yes, I did get that role. Again, I was in Paris, I was shooting that film, and some Israeli directors came to meet me at my hotel. And they asked me if I'd go to Israel and star opposite Kelly McGillis in a film called Dreamers or Unsettled Land. But I was playing a concert violinist, she was playing a doctor. We were Jews coming out of World War Germany and after World War One, settling in Palestine, which was then known as Palestine, now Israel. And so, yeah, I had to play the violin, but there was no way. And I said, "What do you want me to play?" He said, "I want you to learn the cadenza section of the Tchaikovsky violin concerto." And I went, "Oh my God, by whom?" And they said, "Well, how about the one with Pinchas Zuckerman's version?" And I thought, okay, that would take me a lifetime. Pinchas Zuckerman. They said, no, all you have to learn is the fingering and the bowing, and we'll have the real violin play, but we're going to have close up on your fingers and the bowing. So you have to be meticulous. So, Harvey, I spent 6 months. I spent 3 months, 2 months in New York, 2 months in London. I was doing the Normal Heart in London on the West End. And outside the dressing room, I saw a busker playing the violin one day, and I hired him. So every day after work, I would work with him for an hour on the fingering. And then in Israel, I had another concert violinist who played with the Tel Aviv Symphony Orchestra teach me the rest of it. And honestly, 6 months of work boiled down to less than a minute on the screen, but it was worth it.
And you needed me to remind you of that when it took
I,
6 months of your life?
I forgot, honestly, but thank you. Yeah, well, that's what I think any really good actor would do. My heroes did that. The guys that I admired growing up, I mean, Marlon Brando and all those guys from the Actors Studio, James Dean and Laurence Olivier, Ralph Richardson, John Gielgud. These guys were my heroes. And I thought, that's the least that I can do.
Well, it strikes me, John, that because of the intensive preparation you do for a role, there must be things that your characters have taught you. Does that make any sense?
Yes, it does. Harvey, exactly makes sense because I like to think that I bring something to each character that I'm playing, but that the character brings me as much as I bring to him. And I've learned so much about life and about the mistakes that my characters have made for one reason or another. Their lives in some of the tragedies where my characters die because of mistakes that they made, I try to avoid those mistakes in my real life.
In preparation for this interview, last night I watched your performance as the young Nazi, Karl Hoffman, in the TV movie Hitler's SS. And I was reminded that your dear father, Dr. John Victor Shea Jr., served in the army during World War II. He fought in the Battle of the Bulge. Was it difficult for you to play a Nazi?
Well, yes. I mean, we can't think in the 20th century of anybody kind of more diabolical to play. But what was interesting to me about that particular role and that particular film was that it was about an ordinary German family. And it was the first film ever made about it, right? So Bill Nye, the great English actor, played my brother. And it's about that German family and Carol Baker, who had done Baby Doll, remember years ago, the Tennessee Williams play film, who was playing my mother, and this great English actor was playing our father. And it was about how that family was torn apart by the political repercussions of the rise of the Nazis and the breakup of Germany after World War I into the brown shirts and the black shirts. So my character goes one way, as you saw, Harvey, and then Bill Nye's character goes the other way, and it's about the conflict and what happens within that working class ordinary family. So what I hope the film does, it gives us an insight into, what might have been the innocence of just an ordinary family, not knowing what they were being dragged into by the SS, right? And the lessons that they had to learn.
It's an excellent, excellent film. Now, I don't know how much you know about me, John, but I'm a retired family and criminal court judge. Did you know that?
No, I didn't, Harvey. No.
Well, the reason I mention that is because of the miniseries Baby M, which dealt with the landmark surrogacy litigation in New Jersey. I can tell you that I dealt with many similar cases in family court, and your Emmy winning portrayal of the father, Bill Stern, was extremely authentic based on my experience. Did you ever get to meet the real Mr. Stern?
I did. Both the Sterns were very much alive. The character that Mary Beth Whitehead was not around. I think she might have even been in prison at that point. But yes, I did meet with them, and I tried to model my character as much after the real Stern as possible. I talked to them. I interviewed them about what it was like, this entire experience of hiring a woman to be the surrogate because you and your wife cannot conceive naturally. So you hire somebody, you pay them, you trust, but you don't understand sometimes the emotional ramifications of that, that the woman who you've hired to give birth actually is going to fall in love with that child and be bonded in ways that were unforeseen, and then take to the road and run with that child. And so the great thing about that film too is that while it definitely documents this family drama, I think it also shows the complexities and hopefully it would create some empathy in the audience as they understand how a mother would do such a thing.
Did you know that that film, Baby M, is routinely showed at almost every law school in North America in the family law program?
I didn't know that, Harvey. No, not at all. That's
Uh,
good to thank you.
One of my all-time favorite John Shea movies is The Impossible Spy, where you portrayed a real-life Israeli hero, Eli Cohen, who managed to infiltrate the upper echelons of the Syrian government and was eventually caught and killed. That was such an intense performance, John, and you got to work with Eli Wallach. That must have been an amazing experience.
Well, Harvey, thank you. I love that experience. And then again, and there again, fate played a role in my casting. So I had been shooting Unsettled Land or Dreamers, the one with Kelly McGillis and directed by Uri Barbash. I had been in Israel for 4 months making that film because they wanted us to rehearse for 2 months, and then we shot for 2 months in the mountains north of Jerusalem. Then one day I'm about to wrap that film, and the phone rings in my hotel, and it's Jim Goddard, the same one who directed Kennedy and Hitler's SS, who calls me from London and say, "John, hello, mate." He said, "I'm offering you a film. I don't know if you want to go there, but we're shooting the damn thing in Israel. Is there any chance you could join me in Israel?" I said, "Harvey, I'm calling you from my hotel in Tel Aviv." And so I said, "When do you want to shoot?" He said, "Well, in 2 weeks." I said, "That's exactly when we wrap our film. Come on over. I'll be waiting for you." And by that point, Harvey, I had spent 4 months there working with all these great Israeli actors. So I had learned Hebrew as much as I possibly could. I'd been living in Tel Aviv. I'd been hanging out with Shimon Peres. I met Ariel Sharon. I'd been all over the West Bank. I'd eaten in all the great restaurants and knew all the great actors. So by the time it was time to make The Impossible Spy about their most famous spy, Eli Cohen, Cohen, I was born to play it. And so then I was able to, again, transform myself into Eli Cohen. I met his widow and I hung out with her, and she was amazing. And the actress who played her was one of Israel's great actresses, Makal Bat Adam. And I have to say, it was a mind-bending experience. The Mossad came to Eli Wallach and me. Eli was playing the head of the Mossad who trains me. And I learned the backstory behind the whole story and went up to the Golan Heights, went everywhere in Israel, with the protection of the Mossad. And I had tremendous sympathy for both sides, the Palestinian side and the Israeli side, as I played this great Israeli spy.
So when you met Barbara Streisand, did you tell her that basically you are an honorary Jew?
I love Barbara Streisand. I met her a few times. I met her at my buddy Harvey Bernstein's wedding in Hollywood. I sat between Steven Spielberg and Barbara Streisand, and my buddy Bernstein was getting married. So I feel like I am an honorary Jew at this point. I love the great thing about acting is learning about other cultures, other people, other psychologies, other religions, other politics. But at this point, yes, I feel great empathy for everything that's going on in Israel right now. And so, yes, and when I saw Barbara, of course, we talked about Yentl. She had seen the Broadway play. And so, I loved her. She was great.
In 1988, you co-starred with Alan Alda, Anne Margaret, and Hal Linden in a great movie called A New Life, written and directed by Alan Alda. What was he like as a director?
Well, Alan Alda is a fantastic person, first of all, and he's a fantastic director, as you've seen. He directed several films. This was a romantic comedy in which an older couple, he and Anne Margaret, are getting a divorce, and they both run off with younger lovers. Anne Margaret meets me, he meets someone else, someone else, and we have this, this romantic dance together. We shot it in New York and I think maybe in Toronto. My scenes were all with Anne Margaret. And so what the great thing about Alan Alda as a director is that having been an actor and a great actor, having done everything that he did, he brought tremendous sensitivity to things. Like in the love scene that I had to do with Anne Margaret, I have to say, he said, well, how do you feel about doing this? And Anne said, well, what do you want to do? And Margaret said, what do you want to do? And I said, well, it's up to you. You're the woman. She said, well, why don't we rehearse? We'll just go to this hotel room and we'll just lie in the bed and let Alan block the scenes with the cinematographer. So we did, fully dressed. We just lay there, and Alan said, and at this point, you'll laugh, and then you'll roll off the bed, and bah, 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 bah. It's a comedy, right? So it comes the day to shoot the scene, and there's a crew all around. People think that love scenes are maybe sexy. They're not. There's 50 people in the room, and there's Alan behind the camera. And Anne Margaret, though, what a sweetheart. She says to me, John, just be careful wherever you put your hands in this take. I said, why is that? She said, do you see the man at the door? I said, I do. Very handsome man at the door. She said, that's my husband. That's Roger. He played James Bond. And believe me, he knows how to shoot.
She is adorable. We loved having her on the show. She's such a lovely human being and incredibly humble.
Yes.
What was it like working with Mick Jagger in Free Jack?
Oh, God. I love Mick Jagger. They called me again, my manager in LA called me and said, we've been offered this film. Do you want to go to Atlanta and shoot a film? I said, well, have you read it? And he said, no, but I said, well, send it. I want to read it. They said, it's a science fiction thriller. I said, well, who's in it? They said, well, you'll be Rene Russo's boyfriend. I said, well, I love Rene Russo. I had met her before and I always loved her. Anthony Hopkins is in it, Emilio Estevez, all these great people. And they said, and I said, okay. And they said, oh, there's one more guy, Mick Jagger. I said, Mick Jagger, I'm in. They said, what? No, I said, no, I'm in, I'm going. And so I got on a plane a couple of days later. I flew to Atlanta. And when they pulled me into the parking lot behind the studio, they brought me into my trailer. I said, which one is Mick Jagger's trailer? They said, it's the one next to yours. So I walk around there, the door's open. I knock on the door and I said, hello. And he goes, oh, just a second. And, and I knocked again a few minutes later. He said, oh, for God's sakes, give me a break. And I said, no, Mick, I'm not an AD. I'm not telling you to come to the set. I'm John Shea. I'm going to be shooting this film with you. Oh, John, come in. I need your help. So I walk into the trailer, and in the middle of the trailer, he's sitting at the table, at the dining room table, and he's playing this Game Boy, like madly pressing these buttons. And he says, John, do you see this blue guy and you see this red guy? That blue guy, I've been trying to keep him alive. The red guy is trying to kill him, John. So they're about to call me to the set. You take the Game Boy. I want you to keep him alive while I shoot the scene. It's a nothing scene. And I said, all right, man, fine. So I follow him to the set. He hands me the Game Boy. I've never played a Game Boy in my life. I have no idea how to keep the stupid thing alive. But Mick's got to shoot this scene where he comes out into a hallway. He's got a machine gun. He's got to shoot a shot and come in. I figure it's going to take 1-2 takes. 23 takes later, Harvey, the director, Geoff Miller, the great New Zealand director, I think, or Australian, says, Mick, for God's sake, stop dancing around like jumping Jack Flash and get this right. So Mick, and I'm looking at this thing, I still have it alive. Mick does one take, he comes out, he stands there, he shoots, he walks over, and Geoff Miller says, excellent, Mick, perfect, darling. Absent confidence. Next set up, please. Mick comes over to me and he says, let me see. And John, you've done it. You've got him alive. Thank you so much. I give him the Game Boy. He's the happiest guy in the world. I spent a month on the set just hanging around with him and the other actors who were done. It was a thrill, I have to say, because I'm a huge Rolling Stones fan and Mick Jagger fan as a person as well as an artist.
Your Mick Jagger imitation's pretty darn good.
I don't know. It's not at all like Mick. He's a great actor. I don't know if you remember him in other films, but oh my God, he's a fantastic.
Yeah, he really is. Now, when you were playing Lex Luthor on Lois and Clark, You didn't play him like a Shakespearean villain or like a comic book character. You made him very modern and three-dimensional. Were you channeling anyone in particular?
Oh, Harvey, that's funny that you would say that. First of all, I was attracted to the script because of the writing by Deborah Joy Levine. This woman had written the Lois and Clark, the Superman mythology, but really reinvented it to turn it into a romantic comedy, a triangle between Lex Luthor, Superman, and Lois Lane. Clark Kent and Lex Luthor are both in love with Lois Lane in this thing, and so we vie for her in crazy ways. But I thought, how am I going to do this? Again, the same manager, Keith Addis, in those days in Hollywood, a great manager, said, read this thing. They're having trouble over at Warner Brothers casting this role. So I read it and I know instantly how he's supposed to be played. Having been through all the films that I had done at that point, having been through psychoanalysis at the John Jay College of Criminal Justice, having played Richard III, a total sociopath, having played all these great characters, I knew that Lex Luthor was a combination of somebody who I knew from New York, which is his name is Donald Trump. And I said to myself, I know that my character has to look like Donald Trump. That is a Manhattan playboy with, good looking hair and a nice suit and top of the world, a master of the universe. But he's got to think like Richard III, the great sociopathic King of England that Shakespeare had written about. So I showed up in Leslie Moonves' office at Warner Brothers, and I do the audition just for Leslie. Leslie says, "Oh my God." He said, "Wait, right here." And he calls the rest of the staff in, and they see what I do, and he says, "That's it." So the next day I go over to ABC. He said, "You've got to meet the head of the head of ABC," and I do it for him, and I get the part. But the secret to it all was that you don't reveal anything until you have to reveal it. Everything is disguised the way true sociopaths disguise everything, right? Again, like they're motivated by appetites that are unconscious. They're not even aware of the fact that they're being driven like spiders to create a web into which their victims fall. And so that was the thrill for me of playing Lex Luthor. And having brought the classical training that I had to the role, I think that one of the things that made it so much fun for the audience out there to watch.
Well, the Donald Trump comparison is definitely giving me new insights into that characterization. And I can't resist asking you, John, what was it like to actually fly in the series finale?
Oh God. You know, you don't really understand what it's like to be any of the actors who have played Superman, including my good friend Chris Reeve, who, the so great, he passed away, buddy of mine from New York. You don't know what it's like until you're strapped into that same harness and lifted by a crane 30 or 40 feet in the air into one of the biggest sound stages in the world at Warner Brothers, where they've got a green screen that stretches, 100 yards, almost the length of a football field, and they're swinging you back and forth like you're a fly at the end of a fishing rod. And that's what I had to do. And you have to balance yourself perfectly in this harness. But luckily, I had been doing my sit-ups and my abs were in pretty good shape. So I was able to fly around, and what a thrill it was. And then little did I know that they were going to transform that green screen experience in the soundstage into me flying over Metropolis like I was Superman himself. Yeah, it was fun.
It was really fun to watch. You mentioned Southie, 1998. You co-wrote, directed, appeared in this very highly acclaimed movie. It won the Jury Award for Best Independent Film at the Seattle International Film Festival. I heard you say, John, in an interview that you were born to be a director, and I know you went to school to become a director, but what took you so long to direct a movie?
Honestly, Harvey, I was so busy acting in plays and in movies and in television that I didn't really have, first of all, I didn't have a subject matter. I didn't have a script. I didn't have an idea about, I was just having so much fun. I was flying all over the world making movies. And that was so much fun, living in Hollywood, living in New York. But then that meeting with Scorsese changed everything, honestly. It was Marty who said, go tell your own stories. There hasn't been a good Irish American filmmaker since John Ford. And so I took that very seriously. And then I told you I started working on the Junkie Priest story, the one I'm still working on, the one I want to make next. But then Southie came to me while I was shooting Lex Luthor. Some guys brought me the script. Two young guys had written the film in by 25-year-old guys who had grown up in the neighborhood of South Boston, who knew it so much better than I ever could. Even though I'm from Springfield, Massachusetts, it's like a galaxy away from Boston, and a galaxy, even if you live in Boston, let's say you're in Beacon Hill, away from Southie, which is like a psychological island, even in Boston. So they took me in. They were the skeleton key that opened it up for me, particularly the guy that I ended up writing the script with, Jimmy Cummings, who I cast as the bad guy opposite Donnie Wahlberg, a fantastic actor, a great writer, but who had grown up in the heart of Southie, who knew everybody and everybody to ask. So the doors were open for me. I spent 3 years. I spent a year writing it on my own, rewriting it because they didn't have any female characters in it. And then I spent a year with Jimmy writing it and producing it, and then a year shooting it in post-production. So those 3 years, we had to go to Whitey Bulger's guys to get permission to shoot there. But you know, something was all worth it because the Southie that we were able to capture doesn't exist anymore. It's all been gentrified. Whitey's gone. That mob, I mean, thank God, isn't in power so much anymore. But it was a slice of American history that is there.
It's a wonderful movie. The other movie you wrote, produced, and directed is Gray Lady, which is a really great thriller. And what I found so cool about that film is that the town of Nantucket seemed like an actual character in the same way that Woody Allen used New York City in some of his movies. Was that intentional on your part?
Well, Harvey, yes, thank you for watching the film and thank you for even mentioning that. So, my buddy who produced it with me, Army Bernstein, the one whose wedding I went to, I told you in Hollywood, had come to me. He lives on Nantucket like I do, and he came to me and he said, "Look, we should make another film together." We had made Windy City. He had written and directed Windy City. I had starred in Windy City with Kate Capshaw, right? So he said, this is many years later. He said, "We should work together again. You may think we're rounding second, but we may be rounding third. Let's go." I said, "Well, what do you want to do?" He said, "Let's shoot a thriller and set it in a resort in the off season." And I said, "Nantucket?" He said, "Well, there's never been a major feature ever shot here. You write it, direct it, I'll produce it." So here we go. So I go to work on it. I fly back and forth. I'm living in New York, fly back and forth to LA. I meet with him and his president of his company, and they beat me up about the script. They give me great notes, creative notes, and we're ready to go. But he says to me at the end of the film, at the end of the pitch, see if you can give it a touch of poetry that allows it to transcend the genre. See if you can give it a touch of poetry to allow it to transcend the genre. So it's not just a thriller, it's more than a thriller, maybe deeper than a thriller. And so I write a romantic thriller based on a lot of things that I know about Nantucket, where I met my first wife and now have met my second wife, Melissa McLeod. And we have two children. I have a son from my first marriage. So for me, Nantucket is the most romantic place in the world. And because I live here and I know everybody on the island because I help run the theater on the island, I know the creative community. My wife is an artist and a painter. So when it came to write the film and actually make the film, I just cast everybody that I knew on the island, as well as the Hollywood people, the New York people, the actors from London like Adrian Lester, Eileen O'Day from Dublin. I brought in Eric Dane, obviously from Hollywood, came in. But in the end, Harvey, to go to your point, the touch of poetry, it turns out, that I had been looking for, turned out to be the people of Nantucket, the wonderful people who allowed me to make this film in their homes, on the streets, in their stores, were volunteered to be in the film, or just, show up when I needed them the most in the worst weather in April and May when it's howling and cold and foggy and miserable. The community of Nantucket was there for me. So anyway, that's my tribute to them, honestly, that film.
That's a great tribute. In 2006, you co starred with Danny Aiello and Judith Light in a very powerful movie called A Broken Soul, which was a trilogy of short films about 9/11. Was that an emotional experience for you?
Yes. Well, of course, I lived in New York. I could see the towers from where I lived. I lived down in Soho and I could see them. And one day they weren't there. And of course, we lost friends and we lost a whole community of people and, the worst thing since Pearl Harbor. And so when given the opportunity to make a short film about that and to give it, to pay some homage to it, I was very happy to do that. And I would do it again in a second. Tell stories like that, that hopefully if somebody watches it, they'll be informed about what happened if they don't know. But if they do know, then they'll be forced to consider, the consequences of taking any violent action ever.
Exactly. Now, John, it's well known that you've been a lifelong advocate for social justice. You were honored by Amnesty International following your performance in Missing, and you were one of the MCs at the largest peace demonstration in American history, the anti-nuclear rally in Central Park in 1982. What are your memories of that experience?
Well, first of all, Missing, which I starred in with Jack Lemmon played my father, Sissy Spacek played my wife. I mean, I couldn't have loved anybody more than both of them. But remember that it was written and directed by Costa Gavras, co-written with Donald Stewart. They won the Academy Award for that, as best screenplay. The film was nominated for 5 Academy Awards. It won the Palme d'Or at the Cannes Film Festival, and it launched me around the world as a film actor, and it made my career. Honestly, it was the rocket ship that. And so, but what I learned, of course, about the film and politically was that this was about the Pinochet right-wing military coup that was fomented by the CIA. And when Salvador Allende, the socialist, democratically elected president of Chile, was killed, as well as 30,000 other people, including my character, in the soccer stadium by the right-wing military junta. Okay. So we wanted to shoot it in Santiago, Chile, where the film is set. We couldn't do that because we were on a hit list. And I was told that Jack and Sissy and I and Costa should never go to Chile because we were going to be killed if we ever went there. So we shot the whole thing in Mexico. So that film opened my eyes to a lot of international political intrigue and the rights and wrongs of not only our government, but every government in the world that tolerates or foments terrorism and murder, okay, for political gain. So, that changed my life about things. And so when it came time, a few years later, I think it was 86, not 82, Missing opened in 82. A couple of years later, it was the June 12th rally. Again, there was a lot of sword rattling going on in the White House. Ronald Reagan was president. I got to meet Reagan. I actually liked him a lot. But it was, Kissinger and Reagan, and it was the Russians were still, I mean, still had the Berlin Wall was up, and the Iron Curtain hadn't fallen. Gorbachev was coming, but we started, the actors and musicians in New York started an organization called PAND, Performing Artists Against Nuclear Disarmament, right? And so that we had this massive rally in Central Park. And we gathered all the great forces. I was the co-MC with Catherine Walker, who was my co-star with Bette Davis in Family Reunion. Catherine Walker was dating and later married James Taylor. So James Taylor called all his buddies, Bruce Springsteen and James and Jackson Browne and everybody else who showed up. And so I was on stage with them when I had a big surprise of my life. So Catherine and I would be up there introducing all the people and hurry to look out across the lawn, the great lawn in Central Park, and see 1 million people all eager, not only just to hear the great music that was being played, but the speeches. And there was a great speaker that I was waiting to speak. Dr. Helen Caldicott came up from Australia and spoke about it, but I get a buzz in my earphone. Look down the stairway. Now, the stage had been built 4 stories above the park because that's the only way the performance could be seen by 1 million people across the yard. So I looked down the stairway, 4 stories, and there is a rather large gentleman dressed in a suit, standing with 2 canes, and I'm told, come down and help Orson Welles. He's the next speaker. He's got to come up to the stage and he needs your help. So I run down the stairs and there's Orson Welles. I say, Orson, what can I do? And he said, well, John, you and I are going to become fast friends right about now. And I said, well, how are we going to do that? He said, you're going to get behind me and you're going to put your right hand on my right buttocks. And you're going to put your left hand on my left buttocks. And you're going to shove me up these stairs, 1 stair at a time. Oh,
Wow. Wow.
I get behind him. He's got two canes. He puts them under his arms, so someone maybe carries them behind me, and I shove him one step at a time up to the stairs. At the top of the stairs, we're so exhausted. I've said to the boys, it's Springsteen's on stage with Jackson Browne and with James Taylor. I say one more song before I run down. They look at me like, all right, we can't give you another song. We're done. And so I said, all right, here we go. And I go out onto the stage and I say, ladies and gentlemen, thanks you to the guys who have just played, but I'm about to introduce you to the man we've all been waiting to hear. The biggest heart in Hollywood, the man who, has a heart the size of Central Park. Please bring him out, the greatest director of all time, Orson Welles. And I look over at him and he's breathing still like this. And he goes, move the podium closer to me. So I take the podium, I get it closer. He drops one cane and it goes down onto the stage, and he takes a step forward. He drops the other cane like FDR did, like Franklin Roosevelt, when he, accepted the presidency of the White House, right? Who was also, crippled at that point. And Orson Welles takes two magnificent steps out. He grabs onto the podium and he looks at the crowd. And he says, well, well, well. What have we here? And he opens his mouth, and from that great heart and from that great soul, there pours forth pure poetry. And of course, the place goes crazy, and he tells it like it is, and that's my Orson Welles story.
What an experience. What a life you've lived. So, John, what do you say to people who don't agree that actors should use their high profile and their voices to speak out about political issues?
Harvey, after that experience and after other experiences, and because of missing, I'd been approached by a lot of people. Like the Sandinistas approached me and asked me to go to Nicaragua and speak for them. But suddenly I was doing a play called The Dining Room at the Playwrights Horizons, written by A.R. Gurney, this great play. It was the same week that Missing opened, and suddenly I was catapulted onto the covers of magazines, including New York Magazine. And a young writer, a woman, was assigned to interview me for this, and her name was Anna Wintour, who Anna Wintour, right, as now the editor of Vogue and all of Condé Nast, and just like a remarkable woman. So we meet and we talk, and I tell her what's going on. And she says, John, I have a present for you. You have to come to my office tomorrow, and I have a book you have to read. So the next day I go on 42nd Street to her office, and she hands me a book over her desk, and it's called The Left Bank. And The Left Bank is a very clever, really interesting book about the rise of socialism and communism in Europe, and how the French artists who embraced a political philosophy and became politically engagé, the French word for politically engaged, how their work declined in quality over the years. That is, the more political they became, the less time they had for art, and in a way their art became over politicized. Whereas the artists who remained disengagé, that is, did their social work through their artistry, those artists flourished in film and theater, in music, and in film, and in art itself, painting. Think of Picasso. He didn't have much to say after he painted Guernica. He didn't have to say it. He did it, right? So that's the philosophy that I embraced, and I always thank Anna Wintour for her advice to me. And so almost since that time, the political work that I do is always through my work rather than out in front. I have stumped for some political candidates, but then I don't do that anymore. I do everything I do inside out, through the work, through film and television and theater.
Well, when you look back at your career, John, your output as an actor has been prolific, to say the least. Your body of work, your work ethic, you create the impression that you're something of a workaholic. Do you think you are?
Well, Harvey, I feel driven. I have to ask ourselves, like you must have asked yourself, why am I still alive when my friends have died? And the answer for me is because I have work to do. And the work that I have to do is a kind of spiritual mission. I think that's why we're all alive. While I grew up Irish Catholic, I've explored all the isms, Buddhism and Hinduism and Judaism and Muslimism and everything. And they all say the same thing. that you better get it right. Like why you're here. We're here to love. We're here to learn. We're here to teach. We're here to share. We're here to give. And so I feel like I have the opportunity while I'm alive to do that. Now, I have a wonderful life. I'm happily married. I have 3 beautiful children. I have tons of friends. And so I do try to find that balance. But when I do have an opportunity to work as I do, then I do pour myself into it 100%. And I try to do things that are tell stories that are worth telling. That's it.
Well, I'm glad you found the right balance because I know that the very last word your grandmother said before she passed away was enjoy.
Harvey, you're amazing that you would know that about me. But yes, my grandmother, Adelaide Dorothy Fuller, lay on her deathbed and she looked up at the sky. She looked at my brother and me. The rest of the family had gone down for dinner in this hospital. She was alone and at peace. And she looked at us both and she said, I said, Grandmother, do you have anything else to say? She said, yes. She looked at us both with the big blue eyes. Enjoy, enjoy, right? Somebody told me the story yesterday about the Dalai Lama. They'd been walking up in the Himalayas on a trek with 2 guides, walking at the top of the Himalayas up near Dar es Salaam in India, where he lives now, right? After the Chinese took over Lhasa and Tibet and conquered all that and destroyed all the monasteries. The Dalai Lama was going for a walk, and this friend, a mutual friend, walked around the corner, and there was the Dalai Lama. And he said, oh my God. I mean, I have to, the Dalai Lama, if anybody doesn't know in your audience, he's the head of the Tibetan Buddhism. He's a fairly enlightened soul, written many great books. And so this friend who was trekking said, Dalai Lama, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I'm meeting you on the top of this mountain. We're the only people up here. I have to ask you one question. Is there anything you have to say about life? And the Dalai Lama looked at this guy and he said, are you enjoying yourself? And he smiled at him. Are you having fun? And the guy had to think about that. Yeah, yes, I am. Here I am at the top of the Himalayas. I'm meeting you. The clouds are parting, the sun is out. This is life. And the Dalai Lama, that's all he had to say. He walked away with this guides and went down his way. My friend went the other way. But that was the lesson that the Dalai Lama had to share. Like, are you enjoying life? Are you having any fun? Are you happy? And even if you're locked in a body with cerebral palsy, with any kind of disease, if you can find that inner happiness, that inner peace, I think happiness awaits you.
And so, all those years ago, when you were studying at Yale, and you look back now at all these years of work, all that you've done, have you had the career that you envisioned for yourself all those years ago?
Well, it was beyond the career that I envisioned for myself, Harvey. First of all, I was a young guy. I was 25 when I graduated, I think. I went to Yale as an actor. I loved acting. I didn't like the acting program there. There were so many great minds at Yale that were unavailable to the actors. So Robert Brustein, God love him, who just passed away, who founded the Yale Repertory Company, who founded the ART, the American Repertory Theater at Harvard. He was my mentor. And so he said, okay, you can leave the acting program, but you can become a director, but you have to write and you have to work and do all those things. So I took whatever I learned in school and then I went to New York, and honestly, through a series of fateful coincidences, one mentor at a time has appeared in my life when I needed it most, probably like in your life. Like I could interview you and ask you how you became a judge, how you became a lawyer, what inspired you, how you're doing what you're doing now. And there are turning points, right, that we have to pay attention to. A series of coincidences that when we look back at them, we see there's the hand of fate. It's kismet, it's destiny. So I feel like I'm doing the right thing. I'm trying my hardest to do it. I want to make this next film. I want that to go global. I've written a novel version of it that's taken me the last 4.5 years of the film story. I want the film and the novel to come out at the same time because I think it'll be a story that'll be uplifting for people, that'll inspire people the way it inspired me.
Promise me, John, that when that movie comes out, you'll come on our show to promote it. I would love that.
Yeah, thank you, Harvey. I will. I'd love to. Yes.
Well, I have to tell you, it's been such a pleasure meeting you and having this opportunity to celebrate your monumental career. I know you're incredibly busy. You don't often do interviews. So thank you so very much for taking the time to appear on our show.
Thank you, Harvey, for your interest, for your passion, for your information, the time you took to get all the information right. And thank you for everything you're doing out there in the world to spread the good word. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Our guest has been the iconic actor John Shea. My name is Harvey Brownstone. Thank you all for joining us. See you next time. Thank you to my producer, Steve Silver, my managers, Rick Marcelli and Robin Bragg Marcelli at the Marcelli Company in Hollywood, my director of programming, Robert Monaghan, my PR directors, Eileen Shapiro and Jimmy Starr, and my entire team at the XPTV1 network in the UK.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to check out all the great interviews on the Harvey Brownstone Interviews YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell to be notified when new videos are posted.